So we spoke last week about Kibbud Avayim. We mentioned how this mitzvah is described by the Gemara, by the Midrashim, as the hardest of the hard mitzvot. It applies while the parents are alive and even after they're 120 or up. It's the difficulty of the mitzvah we described last week as obviously being challenging to take orders from people and to do as I say, because I am a person of a figure of authority. On the heels of our previous conversation just a few minutes ago, telling your kids, do what I say because I'm your father, I'm your mother, and I'm always right. Yeah, it'll get you to like age 8, where they're going to just Google something or look it up on Wikipedia and say, what are you talking about? Here, I found something wrong.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, well, 8 is slow. 8, and that's like the slow kids pick these things up. And our not even 3-year-old knows how to turn on the computer, get into YouTube, and find Curious George. He can't even read. It's the cues from like those one thumbnail shot that you get from the thing. So they're going up quick. So basically, we said that this mitzvah is exceptionally difficult for a number of reasons. Number one, because it's extremely godly. And that's the rule. Wherever you find tremendous spiritual potential, tremendous spiritual responsibility, the closer it is to God, the harder the mitzvah is to fulfill. Rabbi used to talk about this a lot too. He would say that there are some functions, some tasks that you need to do. Go to the DMV to get your license renewed, paperwork, etc., bureaucracy. So there isn't quite as much godly oversight. You really do need miracles to get out of the DMV in less than a day, but the greater challenges come from the mitzvot that are more godly, where there is potentially more reward, and the reward is always commensurate with the effort required of you. And because you have to work on yourself so hard, and you have to either restrain yourself or adjust yourself or accommodate in so many ways, becomes a great challenge. One thing we didn't mention last week, and it's also worth mentioning, not to forget, is that you being the child of your parents is a pretty permanent situation as far as we're concerned here, Olam Hazeh. So it's not one of these mitzvot that once a year I have to sit in a sukkah, eat matzah. It's a constant mitzvah. We talked about this. You have some mitzvot that are more general and more inclusive, some that are more specific. So loving your fellow Jew as you love yourself, that's a pretty constant responsibility. Because in everything that you do, you have to consider what people like, what they don't like, and how to interact with them. So I pay my employees on time because I'd like to be paid on time. It doesn't happen, but I still make my efforts. At least I pay on time. Whether I get paid on time is something else. But you make efforts to... You make efforts to treat people civilly because you'd like to be treated that way. Try to respond to phone calls, texts, and emails because you'd like for people to respond to you. And that's a pretty constant mitzvah. Your parents are constantly with you. We're going to see, even if they're not physically with you, whether they're alive and just distant or not even alive anymore, you still have the same degree of responsibility in respect and in fearing offending them. In other words, the negative aspect of the mitzvah, which is also equally as important, as we're about to explain. So we spoke about your parents being basically partners in the creation of you, and as such, Hashem says that when you honor your parents, you're honoring Hashem, directly and indirectly as well. And when it comes to honor, says the Torah, your father is mentioned first, right? Kabed et avicha v'et imecha. Mentioned twice, both sets of luchot, both sets of commandments. Honor your father and your mother. So why does your father come first? Then later on, the Gemara tells us, it's actually a pasuk in Kedoshim. Ish imo v'aviu tira'u et shabbatotai tishmeru. When it comes to fear, as we're about to define, it's not fear, oh my God, they're going to kill me. When it comes to respectful fear of your parents, then your mother comes first. Why? Explains the Gemara very simply, because when it comes to honoring your parents, even here you have a Yetzer Hara. You might be more inclined to show honor to your mother. Okay, the fathers of antiquity were probably traveling a lot more, probably working longer hours, and I don't know, finance would give them a run for their money, but assuming you were working in the same town, you were still, out when the sun rose and you came back after the sun set. So because your mother is the one with whom you have more direct contact, as far as I can tell, she's the source of my food, she's the source of my clothing, she's the one who's more directly involved in my education. She helps to launder my clothes and to launder my midot, my conduct.
But even subsequent children, they see the physical sign and they say, Mom gives birth to children, as if the father has nothing to do with it. I mean, you have to go through great lengths to convince them that the father had something
that the father is necessary.
That's right, that's right.
That he plays a role.
So that alone, I mean, they just think the mother.
Yeah, which is, by the way, also a very fascinating topic for discussion. Kabbalistic literature is again, full of references to this whole concept that, the male and female aspects of reality, both equally important, both crucial by definition to our existence. The male influence being a more distant one, and the maternal influence. This is why the wife or the mother is very often compared to the Shekhinah. Shekhinah is presence. Presence. Your mother. So think about it this way. I don't know about you. I can say for myself that we always went to Savta's house. Why is it Savta's house? Because my grandfather was sometimes there, sometimes not. Sometimes he was out in the garden, sometimes out working. He'd come back. Who knows? He'd be traveling. Savta's always at home. It was her home. You came into the home and she was there. And it looked the way she wanted it to look, and it smelled the way she wanted it to smell. It was organized in a certain way. She cooked, she baked, she made her own tablecloths. I mean, her name was just all over the place. And my grandfather, Rabbi Shalom, was a very passive participant in the way the home looked and ran, only because it was really the respect was there that this is her show, and she runs it. So you have, it's interesting. A lot of the Mediterranean cultures are very heavily matriarchal. Mm-hmm. I think the Italians no less than the Greeks. In fact, it's interesting, but a lot of the assimilation actually happens between these two cultures, because I think the Jews and the Italians have a lot more in common than they realize. But tremendous, and at the same time, a tremendous respect for the mother, for what she does, for what she brings, for what she teaches. So
songs are written about.
Yeah. How many songs do you know about Dad?
I think none.
Cats in the Cradle. That's a downer. That's a downer of a song. Yeah, that's already like. Are you talking about Italian? Yeah, in English. I mean, the one song I think about fathers is "Dad's Never Home," and it's hard to get a hold of. So,
but that's a notion or a way of life that's changing, at least in many places. You've got a substantial number of homes now in this country where it's the father who's the caregiver.
Right.
At home.
I still think
or where neither parent is.
Yeah. Well, right.
Okay,
Also true.
Okay, but I'm thinking the one where you've got the complete reversal, right. and this is not a minuscule number.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know that it's the majority. So I would
it's not a majority, but it's not a small number.
Still somewhat exceptional. So the questions are twofold. Number one is, why was the traditional household run this way? Probably for a variety of reasons. Leaving the house isn't all that safe in much of the world today. It wasn't any more so back in the day. So they carried weapons, they carried knives, daggers, swords, etc. The home was a little bit more secure. There's the physical aspect of it. Men being typically larger and able to lift more weight. I wouldn't say stronger, because there's many aspects of strength, and men are very weak in many of them. But the nature of our work today has become a lot less physical. So it's not as much an agrarian society. There isn't as much dragging and plowing and pushing and handling livestock as there used to be. And even then you had matriarchs handle livestock as well. So this is the way things were for the overwhelming majority of human history. If it changed, it's relatively recent. I don't know that change is by definition progress. In other words, I don't know that this necessarily brings us closer to or further from God. Don't know that there's a clear-cut answer to that. The other question is, what do these modern changes mean? I'll give you another example of this. Rabbi used to talk about this all the time because they're fascinating ideas. How do we understand, halachically speaking, in vitro fertilization? or organ donorship for that matter. There was no such thing back in the day. It just wasn't possible. So if a couple is married and for whatever reason, the husband is not able to procreate in this particular setting with this particular woman, so she could, in theory, be impregnated by, the sperm of another man. What does that mean? Genealogically, what does that mean spiritually? Is it very... You'd have to be a prophet to answer the question. I just don't know. I mean, we hold this as her child. Where to go beyond that, I don't even know what to say. There are certain...
It's permitted? It's not considered like...
So it's definitely...
extramarital?
There's a lot of halachic literature on this. Rav Moshe Feinstein was one of the first ones who actually had to grapple with it. It just became available in his day. And he had a long and ongoing dispute with the Satmar Rebbe over what's the more proper way to do it, but it's definitely
Well, there's two different issues there. In vitro, where the father is
the father is himself the father, right?
And the in vitro, where it's a third party.
Where he's not, where it's a third party.
Or multiple parties.
Yeah.
Right. So this becomes these become very complicated halachic questions. Answers are hard to come by. There's the other side of it, which is, what does this mean? There are certain physiological roles that a father can't fill. He can't become pregnant, and he probably will not be, nursing his own children. And there are reasons for this. There are explanations, in other words, more on the mystical side of things than anything else. At the same time, you do find that there are couples, for example, where the man fills the traditionally male roles and the woman fulfills the traditionally female roles. And you find couples that are much less dichotomous that way. That really, the men assume some of the feminine responsibilities, and the woman would assume some of the traditionally male responsibilities, and it can work. It can work. There has to be some kind of a balance somewhere, but they can figure it out. So these are really, really good questions. That the mother is more present with her children, I don't know that's necessarily today we give the kids to a daycare center when they're already 3 or 6 months old. Even there, the overwhelming majority of employees are women. That I can tell you from experience. I mean, you don't find too many men in early childhood. And there has to be a reason for that. I don't know that there's a legitimate explanation for why men are not drawn to early childhood education, whereas to women it seems to come almost instinctively. Not that every woman's a great educator, but that there's something about early childhood education. There's a connection that's maybe easier for women to make than it is for men. I don't know. No shortage of men studying psychology or psychiatry, educational psychology. There is something to be said for it. It's a phenomenon. Tell me because it's a traditional role, because I don't know if society respects too much tradition today. I don't have a better explanation for that, and there may well be a genuinely spiritual aspect to this, that women are able to make a connection that men can't, at least in this stage. When we're told that honor comes more naturally to your mother than it does to your father, and this is why your father comes first in the pasuk, not because he's more important to honor, but specifically because your natural inclination is going to be to go the other way. You give honor to what's tangible, to what's present. Again, going back to the discussion about Avodah Zarah, it's much easier to connect to that which is physical, that which is present, that which is... What does a child know about his or her father? Try to explain what your father does for a living to a kid, especially today. I program computers. It's a computer. I eat, I drink, I cry, and I go to sleep. What does that mean to me? Yeah. I know adults like that. So... you can talk about a lawyer or a doctor, an accountant, a traveling salesman. This is very abstract for a young child. So the child is naturally going to be inclined to give honor and respect to the parent that's more present, that's more tangible, that's more involved. And the Torah comes to correct for this, not to say that your father's honor is more important than your mother's, that it's no less important. And that the logical order of the pasuk, what does the Gemara Masechet Kiddushin says this? Logically, you're more inclined to honor your mother than your father. It's easier, maybe, to honor your mother than your father. Try to correct for this and try to honor them both equally. And then we go back and we say the opposite when it comes to fear. And this is not, mind you, fear, she's going to beat me up. This is fear, like,
Awe?
well, yeah, awe in the sense of things you don't do in honor of your parents. So honoring your parents, we're going to explain that in a second. Honoring your parents would be things that you proactively do, get up and do in order to show honor for your parents. What we describe as fear or awe, or however you want to call it, yirah in Hebrew, just things that you will refrain from doing, that you will not allow yourself to do or say, etc. Out of respect, out of a fear for dishonoring or disrespecting your parents. And there... מה ההפך?
דרך כלל מכבדים יותר את האבא, כי הוא יותר דיסטנס, ואמא היא כל הזמן...
Yeah, okay, excellent question. Familiarity breeds contempt is the English expression for this. The more familiar you are with something, the less you respect it. Familiarity. And then you have distance makes the heart grow fonder. Right. So that's a very valid point that you today. I don't know today that fathers are all that honored. I mean,
I don't know if you need to translate.
Yeah. So the Ora's question is today. You would think that today your natural inclination is to honor your father is a bit more distance in that relationship, but that your mother's always there and out of this familiarity. So. Good question. I don't know to tell you that what's commonly typically done is a good example of how the mitzvah should be fulfilled. If it's the hardest of the hard mitzvot, I think most people probably don't get it 100% right all the time. I also think that there might be a confusion between honoring your father and being afraid of him. So at my age, I'm not all that afraid. Anyway, that's actually in pretty good shape, but I'm not afraid that he's going to attack me. Yirat kavod, right? So younger, smaller kids, if it's something like, the report cards came home, and a mother says to her son, wait until your dad gets home. That's not necessarily the honor that's shining there. It's more the kid's afraid of getting punished. So I still think that your average child feels more of an attachment to the mother than to the father.
Attachment.
Well, attachment in the sense that not that the child's behavior is always perfect, but that there's an obvious preference. It's an easier interaction. I don't know. Modernity's changed quite a bit. It's really hard to say how these things compare to what they used to be. But this is at any rate how the mitzvah is described, and it's fascinating. I mean, the Torah is telling you. You have natural inclinations, and even in this mitzvah, you need to balance them. Your father deserves, honor, even if he's less present, and you're more inclined to honor your mother. Again, a simple explanation, at least for a younger child, would be: it's true that Ima, maybe prepares the food for you. She's there when you get home from school. Abba's the one paying for it. Abba sponsors the system from a distance, but he does his best to pay the bills. So you're seeing the business end of it, and there's a whole other system there that you're not aware of. By the time you get older, you'll be able to figure it out, but your goal is to close that gap. I need to learn to appreciate what my father does while I'm young enough to be able to honor him without having to go through this myself and say, he was right, I only wish I listened.
The context there is nuclear family.
Yeah.
Which is less and less the relevant context today also.
You say relevant. There are less and less nuclear families today.
Yeah.
I sign off on that. Is that a good or a bad thing? Do the parents or the children gain or lose from it? Do we have more or less respect? It's certainly harder for us, I think, on many levels, to show the same degree of awe and respect for parents when one of them or the other is always absent. And there's an interaction between parents that I think is so crucial that the kids need to see. I'll give you a good example of this. Something really cute that my wife picked up from some lectures she had heard before she was dating before we even met. That it's really important to impress upon the children, dignified communication between the parents, right? That's hard enough to do with anybody, especially, so again, Kibbud Avayim is tough because you're constantly around your parents when you're younger. I mean, you're pretty constantly around your spouse. And it's really important for the kids to realize that communication is respectful, that, requests are honored. If my wife asks me for something and I'm sitting there fidgeting with my cell phone for a few minutes and don't even realize what she said, how attentive can I expect my kids to be when she asks me to do something too? And so the same, has to work that way too. But it goes beyond that. It goes, to the point of if you have something you want to communicate, you can sometimes cleverly use the kids as a go-between. Go tell your Abba that the coffee that he made was fantastic. No joke. It sounds simple and funny, but it's so true. Just out of nowhere, go tell Ima that Abba loves her. Things like this. For the kids, okay, it's cute. He's going to go get a hug and a kiss from his mom because he said something sweet. But this, as opposed to cups and plates flying and go tell your Ima that. So it really gives the kids a very deep look into how relationships work, and that's so painfully missing from the single parent home. It doesn't matter who's right, who's wrong. Everyone's wrong. I don't see how. You have a couple of examples of this, but the statute of limitations hasn't expired on some of these stories. I can tell you plenty of anecdotal evidence, divorces that I had to get involved in, where more often than not you come across complications that go back more than one generation. One classic example, I had this couple that came once from Muncie. They weren't all that observant. I don't know what they were doing in Muncie, but they were Israeli. And the guy comes out of the blue. He spoke to someone who knew, as a friend of mine. There's a Hebrew-speaking rabbi here, so he came all the way to Fairlawn. He says to me, Rabbi, I want to talk to you. My wife and I decided that it's time for us to get a divorce. It's terrible. I'm sorry to hear it. Is your wife and I here, or is it just you deciding that you need a divorce? And he came alone. I said, no, it is what it is. I said, should we think about this a little bit? How long you guys been married? 16 years. 16 years. Not a fly-by-night Las Vegas, whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas kind of marriage. You have any kids? Yeah, we have 3 kids. 3 years. 16 years and 3 kids. Don't think maybe there's something that can be done. We can talk, figure things out somehow. No, it's over, it's done. I don't feel the same way about her. She doesn't feel the same way about me. Whatever. Did you find someone else? How'd you? No, I don't think this is for me anymore. Okay, so they come and I asked him if he could come back with his wife, and we sat there and had a really long and frank discussion about this. And I said, you guys have to think about this. That there are kids in the picture. Staying together may or may not be the right thing to do, but showing your kids that there's a relationship worth working on, even making efforts, even if it doesn't succeed, is one thing. Throwing in the towel and moving on is something else. I said, it gives a bad example. Statistics prove, without a doubt, children of divorced parents are more likely to divorce themselves. This guy says to me, I don't agree with that. I don't think it's true. I said, really? He says, yeah. He said, my parents were divorced and I turned out fine. Just like that, with a straight face. Perfectly straight face. Like, no, it's nonsense. What you're talking is... So it's really... It's not for nothing that Hashem created the world such that it takes a man and a woman to procreate. And there are individuals who do that part fine, and then getting married is something else, then staying married is something else altogether. The way that the nuclear family, used to work was that there was a system, there were certain roles and responsibilities that were assumed by the couple, by the kids, older, younger. Sometimes you had grandparents and aunts and uncles involved, for better or for worse. A lot of that's changed. I can quote the sage advice of Woodrow Wilson, that change is not necessarily progress. I don't know that society is progressing or degenerating. There's a movement that calls itself progressive. I think it's pretty pretentious for a movement. I think every movement considers itself progressive, but I don't know that everything they represent is necessarily genuine progress. I think it's just society does what it does, then you can always look back and assign values to different phenomena. I'm just not sure that would be profit or benefit from this.
Is there... I'm under the impression, though, that somewhat touching on Noah's question, that there is room in halakha for kind of a hierarchy of authority in the home, that kind of traditionally speaking, the buck stops with the father. Like he kind of calls the shots, so to speak. And I have this kind of stereotype in my mind, maybe not exclusively of the Sephardi model, but of the Sephardi model.
In antiquity have been this way in many cultures. Here, interestingly enough, Rav Volbe was very well-known Rav in Bnei Brak, spoke a lot about education. Here he said, when it comes to our generation, we need to apply different rules in modernity, where authority doesn't work with kids. This generation, he said, is extremely frail. They're not able to take musar, or they can't take
I mean,
but assertion. Anything assertive, anything dictatorial is just doomed to fail at some point. Yes, there comes a moment in time where if a child sticks a fork in an electric socket, and I'm just going to get up and forcefully change that, because I might not have the time to engage in discussion. I'm not saying everything a 2-year-old does, needs an essay, but it's a model of parenting that probably is less and less appropriate in this day and age. For better or for worse, I don't know. I think it's great that kids have the opportunity to think more for themselves today and to figure things out. They experiment a lot more with that. They don't grow up with much respect for authority, which is a tough nut to crack. But that's these situations. Where clearly you see societies tending away from that. It's very difficult, near impossible, to try and force that on a structure.
I mean, less so from the angle of the kids, so much as the application of what we're talking about here. Kind of your inclination to honor your mother, and therefore your obligation to kind of steer your inclination towards your father. When, again, maybe in my wrong impression, but in my impression, having the father kind of be this sort of authoritative, dictatorial figure, where the mother is like kind of subordinate hierarchically to the father.
You don't find much reference to subordination or hierarchy in here. You will find one reference where, because the father supports the family financially, that everyone owes him a certain degree of respect. The Gemara says that if your parents are still married, in a way your mother owes your father honor as well, because he's the one supporting, the household. So in theory, if the two of them were to request a cup of water at the same time, you might be inclined to give it to your father. If your parents were divorced, however, the Gemara says you give it to whoever you want. If your father is no longer supporting your mother, and your mother no longer owes him anything by way of honor or respect, their honor is literally perfectly identical. Your obligations to them are exactly the same, and it's not a function of one being hierarchically superior or inferior. In fact, to the contrary, the mitzvah comes down this way. Because you might have a natural inclination to give your mother more honor than your father, make sure to give your father honor. And because you might naturally be more inclined to be careful about not dishonoring your father, you have to be equally as careful in not dishonoring your mother. One quick note, though, back to your question, Mort. It's much harder for the kids, but they still need to be taught to honor both parents equally in a non-nuclear, non-conventional family. It's a very difficult thing, but it needs to be taught. If a couple's going through a divorce, they have a little bit of advice, counsel coming to them. One of the first things I would tell them is you cannot berate each other. Not in each other's presence, not behind each other's backs.
And that works about 0.25% of the cases.
Not even. You're so generous. No, but what happens is that the kids pick up on that. If my dad thinks my mom is crazy, my mom thinks my dad's a moron, and I'm half him and half her, I'm just, there we go back to labeling the kids. There's a big red, fail stamp on my head, and it's tough. So it's hard to do, especially when it's a bitter, acrimonious divorce. Your father's a good man. Things didn't work out for us. I'm sure he'd be great with someone else. Your mother is a great mother. She's devoted, make a wonderful life. It didn't work out between us. That doesn't mean that she doesn't have good qualities, that he doesn't have good qualities. And you almost need to, I don't want to say artificially, but you need to build up this concept of And regardless of how I get along with your father or with your mother, he's your father, she's your mother. You have obligations, responsibility. That's really tough. We're going to talk about that probably next week. That's really tough. Or one of the parents is a psycho.
Oh, I was just going to ask.
Oh yeah, there are psychos out there.
I mean, an abusive parent, a clearly abusive parent, how can, what sense do we make of that? Next week?
I spent a good chunk of today in a mental hospital.
Wow.
Difficult situation there between a husband and wife that my wife and I both know. Oh yeah, they're out there.
I say stay away from them. I'm sorry. I'm kidding.
Well, it goes back to these discussions about what she knew before they got married, after, whatever. But it's tough. So yeah, if one of the parents is a legitimate psychopath, there's definitely there are provisions. Interestingly enough, there are different opinions on what degree of respect you owe them. In fact, we had kings who completely disrespected their fathers who were evil, and they were praised for it. I mean, if it was a public disgrace of the Torah and of God, then my dissociating myself from that might be the right thing to do. At the same time, it might be more appropriate for someone else to do. Still, it's in some way, there's also a fascinating, tremendously nishmatic question to ask. That's why did God bring me here through this particular father, particular mother? Because I think every child at some point asked the question of all the parents on the face of the planet had to be this man and that woman. It's like almost as if it was a joke, a God's sense of humor.
Well, because all other parents are perfect compared to the ones I
naturally.
have.
So, right, the ones that are more strict, the ones that are more permissive, the ones that and every child goes through this. I mean, we heard this. Our kids are already 5 or 6. Oh come on, so and so's mom lets him watch this or that on YouTube, or this one's dad lets him get that kind of video games. And all right, that's great for so and so, whom we all happen to know, and is not an exemplary student. But let's not go there. There are things that your mom and dad expect you to do a little differently, and we have other hopes and desires for you, etc. Yeah, and it's really tough. It's really tough to have a psycho parent. It's hard to, it's tempting to crack jokes or insult them. The reality is, you can't find something nice to say. I mean, at least keep it calm. I remember working with a woman whose her husband was a total nut. I met the man, and I can attest to that. He was violent with her at some point, and she called the police. So they have 5 children together, and none of the kids can stand the guy. The younger one's a little bit more maybe than the older ones because they didn't know as much to understand. By the time he already developed a conscious understanding of what's going on, he was already out of the house. And she was really torn. She was making efforts and trying to explain, yeah, he's crazy, he did some crazy things, but he's your father, he was a doctor, there are certain things that you can do with him, maybe certain things that you can't, but trying to find the positive side, trying to bring something good out of it. It was really tough in his case. There wasn't that much good about him. It's just hard, really hard. But that's part of the challenge, because none of our parents were perfect. And if you expect the parents to be perfect, I have to be a perfect father in order to get honor, or in order to get awe from my kids, then forget it. And this, as we mentioned last week, this is crucial to the understanding of Hashem. Hashem is perfect, and we don't get that. We still contest some of the rulings and some of the judgments, and we still protest. Why did she get more than him, and why does he have it better than that guy? And we need to develop this respect for Hashem regardless. It's for the better. It's what Hashem wants and knows. And then we can't make those assumptions about human beings. Going back to your hierarchy question, Lee, I can't say, do it because I said so, because I'm your father, and because I know everything. I may make a mistake, and even then it's important for the spouse to support and to say, look, if that's what your mother told you, if that's what your mother said, if that's what she decided, you're going to respect that. Whether or not I want the kids to know I agree or don't agree is an excellent question. But sometimes just for the sake of, again, it's not me standing there and pounding on my chest and saying, do it because I'm your dad and I'm always right. even if I'm wrong, I'm still the one paying your bills. I'm still the one sending you to school. There are certain basic rules of conduct that I expect here. And if they disrespect their mother, then really it's my job to step up and say, there's no way you're going to continue living in this house, sleeping under this roof, without developing respect for your mother and all the hard work that she puts in and all the sleepless nights, etc. You might not agree with everything she does. That's the fun part about growing up and starting your own family. You can do whatever you want once you're paying your own bills. So long as that's not the case, Mr. Tough Guy 8-year-old, you're going to have to accept that there's an order here. Not defending to the death every decision that's made. What I'm defending is the honor of the institution. She's your mother. This is just the way it's going to be. You have to respect that. He's your father. You may not agree with what he said, but you have to respect it. You may be able to disagree respectfully, but there has to be a certain respect there. It's not easy.
But what you said earlier about just because I'm bigger and stronger, well, then there should be a real clear and strong opinion about never spanking the children, because spanking only says I'm bigger and stronger, nothing else. It actually says you have good reason to disrespect me because I don't have other means to communicate to you what I'd like to happen in this household. So I've resorted to the simplest, lowest thing of I'm bigger and stronger.
Yeah,
So,
it doesn't last very long. It's a very short-sighted approach to parenting.
but people it's back in vogue, spanking, believe it or not.
Back in vogue, I don't know.
That's what I
it's
read recently.
prosecutable in most states.
I think it's horrible. It's to me, it's
Put me in line a couple times.
unconscionable.
Yeah, I mean, I could say, the attitudes different. I can say growing up in the 70s that, I remember on more than one occasion getting 5 across the eyes, and I don't think it was uncalled for. That's not.
It's
I can tell you that now at the ripe old age of 35, I can say that I probably had some of it coming to me. But, maybe back then I respected it differently, and maybe maybe it was my perspective on it that if I thought it was frivolous, random, arbitrary, capricious, I might.
I think it just lowers the adult and the parent, especially, just makes them look
Might depend on the
stupid.
adult, and might depend on the child. I don't know. Look, I'll tell you one thing that I've got a relatively short fuse for. It's bullying, and that's if one kid is abusing.
What do you do by hitting?
No.
You're just bullying.
So I'm not saying that the solution to this is to do to the child what the child's doing to somebody else.
Right.
But sometimes getting physically involved is necessary. If one kid is abusing the other, if one kid gets a rise out of watching someone else suffer or cry or snatch things from other people, I don't know that every situation in the world can be resolved with discourse and discussion. It doesn't work with
I'm not
Iran.
saying that.
I don't know that it works with.
There are other punishments. There's separation. We live in society.
I mean, you can tape the kids to different corners of the room, but
Anyway,
Look,
what
I'm not
do you say?
necessarily.
That's another whole year's discussion. But how do you explain divorce being present as far back as the Torah?
Excellent question. We really grappled with this today. It was a very difficult situation, and we made some progress. Divorce doesn't necessarily mean that it was doomed to fail from the beginning, because people can change and they can make really bad decisions. In fact, there are halachic provisions for this. In terms of the marriage changed, husband's unemployed, becomes a deadbeat. I'd say substance abuse or physical or emotional or verbal abuse. Absolutely. No reason we should have to put up with that. It's there because it solves a certain problem. It resolves a certain situation. If the communication is toxic, if the relationship is destructive, then it is by far the most desirable alternative to it. There are couples that probably never should have gotten married, and there are couples where things change. Mental illness, it's a humdinger. There are situations that warrant it. People are imperfect, so they can either make bad decisions before they get married, or they can make bad decisions while they're married. They can decide they don't want to be married anymore. Yeah, in one case I remember think they were from Queens, and both grew up modern Orthodox and educated, professional, etc. They had 3 kids. He decided one day he doesn't want to be observant anymore. Spoke to a few rabbis, spoke to a few psychologists. It wasn't for him anymore. He couldn't figure it out. 3 times, I mean, maybe 200 gittin that I wrote. I remember 3 times that the husband cried. I had 2 in one day, and this was one of them. The guy just, as he's giving the get, he just, like something wasn't there. So he made a decision. He thought about this. He just decided he didn't want to do this anymore. Much of her life was based on this. Their kids were going to Orthodox schools. They were members of a certain community. And she started to wonder, how could someone that she knew and loved change so drastically from a relatively short period of time? So it's there. So if this relationship is no longer contributing anything positive to either one, then this thankfully prevents them from being condemned to eternity in hell, on earth and then after. The question is, now that there's a preponderance of divorce, the question has to be asked. So is this, are we exercising poor judgment before getting married? Are we rushing into it? Are we not quick enough to get into it? I'm going to put that out there. I don't think dating for 5 years is necessarily an indicator of the health of the marriage that ensues.
In fact, I've read articles to the contrary that couples who live together before being married are actually more likely to divorce.
They published a study on this, if it was over the summer, if it was before or after the Chagim. I remember reading a study about this, that the dating has diminishing returns at a certain point, and that there is a negative. The longer they stay together, it seems like the more likely they are to fight. Anyway, so the question is, what exactly is behind it? Is it that the expectations change, the expectations aren't being met? Is it the dating process, the dating system? Are we dating right? Are we dating for the right reasons? The respective roles of the spouses. 101 different things I'll look into before I make a blanket statement about it. But it's there. It's there to prevent people from suffering unnecessarily and unnecessarily long. What it implies afterwards for the kids. There are more and more kids growing up today with parents who don't live under the same roof. It's tough. It's tough. I know from education, from working in education, that teaching some of these kids was a challenge. Every kid's a challenge. Nothing's easy. None of these kids are a walk in the park, but that much more difficult. There's just another dimension of difficulty to it when there's a little bit less stability in that way. If the interaction between the parents and kids was unstable to begin with, and this lends more stability to it, just stay with the normal parent and let the psycho go, then that's probably a bracha. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It's probably a bracha. I can tell you that when it comes to the different roles played in education, though, that's also a really tough place to be. If the parents aren't sharing the child raising responsibilities, it's very tough for one parent to play all positions. I'm not saying, again, a nuclear family, the father was more the disciplinarian, the mother was more the clemency of the court, but it's very tough for one parent to be the end-all be-all of that relationship. It's hard. It's a lot of different hats to wear. It becomes complicated. I'm not saying it can't be done. It has been. You had in antiquity widows and widowers too. You figured out a way to make it work. But it's tough. It's tough. I don't think it's an easy thing. The kids don't even get the complexity of it really until they grow up. It's not something you can explain to a 5 or 6 year old or to a 15 or 16 year old. Even 25, 26. I don't know how much they get of it. It's a very hard situation to explain to them. And in their formative years, they're not yet able to appreciate, how these things work.
Well, the tragedy is even the worst case. I know a few psychologists in Israel who have very observant. They're not observant, and the observant community goes to them because they don't know the community. So it's And there's some very, very serious issues, not unlike other communities, but you would expect differently from somebody who actually learned Judaism presumably or something, but I mean, really frightening where incest and the mother knows, and it's just horrendous, horrible.
Yeah, there's, I think we're a bit behind the curve in some of the mental health issues. Thank God there's a little bit more awareness today.
Yeah.
There are communities that are a little bit harder to work with. Some of it has to deal with people's perceptions. I can think of at least one example that I know up close and personal that divorce would have made sense and would have been the right thing to do. Mental illness, again, the case of minimal disclosure before the marriage. He had episodes before they got married, and it ended up where it did. And there's a perception, what happens with the kids? What happens if the kids want to learn in certain institutions, or people are going to inquire about this if they want to get married, they want to dating for marriage, etc. And it's difficult. One of the things that we need to do is to start changing the perceptions. I don't think we should encourage everybody to get divorced, but we should be, at least allowing for the fact that, again, people make mistakes, people change, it's okay. The responsible thing to do is to address these issues when they come up. And the fact that your parents aren't divorced doesn't mean they were happy, doesn't mean that, everyone was meeting all of their obligations. I have to find it wasn't, I thought it was Rav Henkin, but I don't think it was. There's a rabbi in Brooklyn who officiated weddings and divorces back in the day when local rabbis today don't do anything. Divorces, the big deal. We have a few of them here in the U.S. that do it. So someone asked him about the preponderance of divorces. This was already in the late 70s. It was becoming more than 1 in 100 couples, so it was already too much. So the rabbi responded. He said, I have to tell you, here in America, I think there are too many divorces. People are too quick with their finger on the trigger. He said, in Europe, I don't think there were enough. So just because your grandparents and great-grandparents didn't get divorced doesn't mean they were living the ideal marriage. There were obstacles to divorce. There was a stigma, there was how people view it, stereotypes, etc., difficulty marrying off the kids. Making a living was tough. Really limited resources. Making a living and supporting yourself was really tough. So you wanted to strike out on your own and tell a guy, hit the road. It's one thing, but if your parents were older and couldn't afford to support you, it was going to be tough. So, yeah, we're going to stop short of solving all of society's problems in one sitting, but we'll get to the rest of them next week. We got something.